Last session, Bob and Diana talked to us about the planning for the strategic plan initiative over the next year. That work really is built upon all the hard work you've done over the past dozens of years as well. And so this morning, we're going to get a chance to hear from these regional initiatives from across the range to talk about what they've been doing, what their plan is focused on, and it's a chance for us to learn about what do we want to take from these different efforts as we build the national plan and priority setting process. So I'm excited to go through this. We have 8 sessions, each 10 minutes each. It's going to be a lot of information, but I think it's important as we move forward over the next couple of days. We're going to start off with Bob to talk about the range-wide plan.
This is probably a worse nightmare, having me before and after the break. But I'm here to talk about the range-wide strategy. Most of you have already know it, but it came out in 2012. It's a large document that at the time was a state-of-the-art, but now we know a lot more about it, about Restoration Whitebark Pine, and it's time that we augment it and refresh it. So all of you know that the problem was with all the other evaluations and plans that were out there, the restoration strategies, is that they were pretty much local to regional, and there was no range-wide strategy. So in 2002, Diana, myself, and about 6 other people got together and said, we got to start putting together a range-wide strategy, but nobody really had any time to do it. So it took us 12 years to actually get it together and published. And over that 12 years, of course, a lot of research and a lot of management have been done. And there are many things that were done that were not included in the restoration strategy. But here's the major points. We tried to do both Canada and the US. The major part of the strategy was that it had to have a cross-boundary, multi-governance approach to it, and there was no way we could restore Whitebark Pine without looking at across agencies and across countries. The strategy was never designed for people to pick up and use as a way to develop prescriptions for their projects. It was always designed to give them context and information that they can use to put in their own plans as they developed it. It has many scales management. It was designed to be used not only at the Washington office level, but right down to the regional and forest and district level. It focused on emulating historical processes, although that is only a very small part of the thing, and it was more of a top-down or then a bottom-up approach to the Whitebark Pine strategy. Again, there was really not enough detail. In order to really put in stuff for local applications, we really had to have a lot more data in order to do that. Here's the strategy in its summary. You can see that there are 4 main principles, guiding principles, that served to develop the 10 possible actions. The guiding principles are promote rust resistance, conserve genetic diversity, save the seed sources, and employ restoration treatments. And these are the guiding things to develop anything else. And then underneath those were 10 actions, all of which either the combination or alone will constitute a restoration action. And they range from planting seedlings, conducting research, all the way around to growing seedlings and protecting the seed trees. Each one of these in the strategy has examples, and each one of these can be implemented at 6 levels of spatial organization, either across the entire range, which would be you cannot actually collect seedlings or seeds without a range-wide effort to conserve rust resistance. Down to a regional level, there are things that should be done at a regional level, at a forest level, at a landscape, and at a stand and at a tree. And of course, tree levels would be putting on verbenone patches or doing daylighting or something like that. And so this range-wide strategy had 6 inherent organizational scales in it with 10 management actions and 4 guiding principles. And of course, once it reached the audience, everybody turned around and looked at it and said, Bob, why are you putting out a restoration strategy when climate change is going to kind of make sure that the species doesn't really be there in the future anyways? If we look at all the existing literature, we see that everybody's predicting whitebark pine to fall off the table. So why should we invest the time and effort to do that? So 3-4 years ago, the Great Northern Landscape Cooperative gave us some money to go ahead and develop a companion guide to the restoration strategy. This companion guide, there are some prints out here on the table by the Whitebark Pine. When you buy your raffle tickets, you can go ahead and grab one of those particular publications. And this companion guide focuses on climate change and restoration of a whitebark pine. In the original strategy, we had like 3 paragraphs on climate change, and we really didn't hit it very hard. In this one, we hit it really hard, and it's a really comprehensive integration of not only existing literature that's on there, but we also did extensive landscape simulation modeling to see what would happen under various restoration scenarios. This new publication, Restoring Whitebark Pines in the Face of Climate Change, coupled with the range-wide strategy, should provide you with some basic reference and a citation to help you build your prescriptions and so on as you do your project level work. What amazed me about these two is that if you looked at both of them, you will see that even in the climate change future, the same, if you summarized what we're really talking about in restoration, is that the list and priority of restoration across the two really don't change. Is that we really have to collect rust-resistant seed, we have to grow rust-resistant seedlings, we have to allow wildfire and wildland fire use to do most of the work, plant as much as we can from those seedlings that we've grown, prioritize based, if we can prioritize the planting based on the climate change adaptive strategies, and save the relics, save the seed rust-resistant individuals, and then patch in the holes where you feel you absolutely have to do something. Patch in these holes with active restoration, which may include mechanical silvicultural treatments or prescribed burning and so on. And then without measuring or monitoring, we're kind of don't have a way to make sure that what we're doing is right. So monitoring is absolutely essential to this whole process. And so that, in summary, is the range-wide strategy.
Thanks, Bob. Ellen Young, the Shoshone National Forest, is here to talk about the GYA planning process. You're way back there. Come on down.
Today we're going to talk about the Greater Yellowstone Whitebark Pine Strategy and its associated adaptive management plan. As it implies, this covers the southeastern edge of Whitebark Pines Range, which basically includes the Greater Yellowstone Grand Teton Seed Zone with some minor exceptions. So that includes 5 national forests, 2 national parks, 2 wildlife refuges, and BLM lands in 3 states, as well as an interregional geneticist joins us in our efforts. The Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee is broken up, has an executive committee of all the managers of those agencies that I've just mentioned, and there's 11 subcommittees that work on different projects, including Whitebark Pine. So this is basically us. I won't go through this, but I know there's several people in the room. We've got about 1/3 of the subcommittee here today, as well as some past members. So if there's additional questions, why don't you guys all raise your hand so we know who you are. Thank you. So basically the strategic goals of our plan were to provide a basis for collaboration among the federal agencies in the GYA, protect the remaining cone-bearing whitebark pine throughout the GYA, maintain and restore the role of whitebark pine in ecosystem function, ensure whitebark pine regeneration and genetic variability through natural and assisted regeneration, and promote fire planting and use that protects high-value whitebark pine. So basically, in developing the strategy, we had to have some core pieces of information to do this. It was basically a GIS, a GIS exercise where we developed a whitebark pine distribution map. We performed a stand condition assessment as well as an ecosystem function assessment. And what that led to were some areas of high priority for restoration as well as high priority for protection. And these were ranked on a 1 through 9 scale. Is that right, Kelly? 1 through 9, remember? So 7 to 9 was basically our highest ranking. So we took that higher level GIS analysis down to what we called the adaptive action plan. We originally called it a mid-level strategy because the GYCC managers wanted us to have an area of focus at a much more realistic scale where they could apply funding and management too, realistically. So basically the tools that we have for implementation are some that Bob just mentioned as well. For protection, we're implementing verbanone pouches or splat. We haven't really got into the flake arena. It hasn't been tested that well. Carbaryl spraying, fireproofing, pruning. We have the long-term blister rest monitoring program with the Greater Yellowstone Monitoring Network that we have established a series of plots, monitoring plots for blister rest. And we also are incorporating climate change into that adaptive management strategy with working through universities like Montana State University with some climate modeling. And Bob is continuing some of that on. A key piece, key piece of the restoration is the establishment of the seed orchard on the Custer-Gallatin Forest, 4.4-acre seed orchard. We also are doing operational cone collection and planting, and while we don't have the rust-resistant seedlings from the seed orchard yet, we're collecting in areas of known high resistance from Mary Francis's studies, and we're doing restoration planting. And this is just some pretty pictures of some of those activities. And as you know, whitebark pine management, you're basically a glorified cage manager. As you know, you have to climb trees twice, once to cage the trees to keep seed predation down so you can get ripe cones for outplanting. So some of the restorations that treatments that we've been focusing on are mostly in the arena of weeding and cleaning and to remove competing conifers to keep whitebark on the landscape. Some of our large-scale fires, it's been a little bit hard to implement protection levels at those scale when you've got roaring wildfires in those areas. So we're trying to do some restoration treatments to fireproof those stands as well. So one of the key points of the Greater Yellowstone area is that we're kind of known for our collaboration. And so tomorrow, as Diana alluded to, we're going to talk a little bit more about the funding sources, but as a group, we have leveraged quite a few funds from a variety of sources. So since the subcommittee was put together in 2001, we've probably spent about $1.5 million on restoration and protection activities. And we do this through a variety of ways. Since we're all federal agencies, we are in 2 different departments, the Interior and Agriculture. We're in 3 regions of the Forest Service. I don't know how many regions of the Park Service. Is it just the 1? And then the 3 BLM lands. So we start out by having memorandums of understanding. So we have the relationship established between the agencies. From there, we develop interagency agreements that we can move funding between those 2 departments and the agencies within those departments. And then between the national forests, we just use each other's job codes and overrides. So I hope nobody in Washington is hearing me say that. So, but it works. So what this results is we have very efficient on-the-ground management to implement the strategy. So we have some force count climbers on Grand Teton National Park that work seasonally, and they rove the whole GYA. We move that money through the interagency agreements through a variety of those funding sources. We also have a series of climbers on most of the national forests have some climbing ability, so they're working on their own lands. We've been pretty innovative with our acquisitions management and implementing contracts, multi-agency, through a very painful process, but we've made it work. Working with contracting officers. So we have multi-agency and multi-jurisdictional contracts that allow us to take this funding and use it where we have the best cone crop or where we're going to be planting. And then the last thing, it's just sweat equity. Each of the members puts a lot of time and effort into this, as well as the seed orchard manager is funded by the Custer-Gallatin National Forest. So the funding to maintain the seed orchard comes through a memorandum of understanding from all the national forests, but the Custer-Gallatin is providing that supervision and that employee. So there's a variety of tools that we use to make it happen. And some of the barriers that we found for implementation, I'm sure it's true for everybody, is that there's only so much time and money. Most of us are doing whitebark pine restoration as other duties as assigned, so we're trying to fit it in with our multitude of other duties. And one of the big things is just the physical limitations of whitebark pine sites. They're inaccessible. Planting seasons only last so long, and you have a very narrow time frame to actually get trees in the ground, whether it be spring or fall. So we're kind of limited on how much you can actually get done, depending on the type of activity If it's thinning, you might have a longer window. But you're looking at a very short operating season. And then when you talk about planning or cone collection, you're talking, in some cases, a much narrower time frame in a matter of days. So with that, in a very small nutshell, is our strategy. And I don't know if you wanted questions now or at the end.
So up next, we've got Andy Bauer from the Pacific Northwest. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the restoration program in Region 6 for the Forest Service, so that is Oregon and Washington. So just looking at the whitebark pine distribution in Oregon and Washington, we have about 1.2 million acres of whitebark pine habitat, which is different than the numbers that you showed this morning, Diana. So I'd like to talk to you to see where the discrepancy is. Maybe we have some more current information. Yeah. And the majority, it's kind of hard to see on this map. Obviously, the whitebark habitat is in the red. The majority of that is on Forest Service land. There is some land on the parks, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Crater Lake, and a little bit on Olympic, and very, very small amounts on BLM and both Washington and Oregon state lands. But the majority of it is on Forest Service land. So we've divided up the habitat within the region into 9 seed zones. And these are basically used for helping to direct the seed movement during restoration efforts. The seed zones are somewhat geographically drawn, but also incorporating topography and some genetic information. Then each seed zone is subdivided into conservation areas. And then each conservation area, if we were basically drilling down here, is subdivided into different management units. And so this way we can focus our activities at the specific management unit level. And I think that this hopefully will feed really well into the national strategy with developing our priority areas. So one of the issues is that, so the blue here that I overlaid is the wilderness area. So about 75% of the whitebark habitat in Region 6 is in designated wilderness areas. So if you look at that across the entire range, and if you add in the national parks, which are kind of managed as wilderness, they're either designated or managed as wilderness. Across all lands, that number goes up to almost 90% of the habitat in wilderness. Then of what's left, there's about 5% that is in inventoried roadless areas. So you do the math, that does not leave a lot of areas where we can, we can do active management. So, Carol Aubrey spearheaded the effort to put together the restoration strategy for Region 6. Came out in 2008. And the goals of the restoration program, the long-term goals to sustain a network of viable populations of whitebark pine and associated species throughout the Pacific Northwest. And then our short-term goals are to promote the recovery of whitebark pine in lieu of endangered species listing. And some of the key actions that were prescribed in the restoration strategy, so restoring the areas affected by the various threats that the species face, fire, bark beetles, blister rust. So to restore those areas by planting seedlings and thinning competing vegetation to reduce fuels and enhance cone production, collecting seed for genetic conservation and also for rust screening. And that feeds into the next action, so to increase the genetic resistance to blister rust through selection, screening, and deployment of seed from the resistant trees. And then evaluating the health, the stand condition, and restoration needs across the species. All of these documents, the restoration strategy, various appendices, annual progress reports, a whole bunch of other information, all these publications are available online at this website. You know, the restoration strategy was printed hard copy. I think that those have all been distributed, but if you're interested in any of this information, it is available online. If you don't get a chance, if you don't get the whole thing here, you can just come talk to me or send me an email. I'll be happy to send you that link. So the program priorities in implementing the restoration strategy and moving forward. In the earlier days, the surveys and stand evaluation was one of the main things because we needed to learn about where whitebark pine was and where it wasn't and what the conditions were. The seed collection, rust resistance screening, and then as we developed some seed stores and determined areas of needed restoration, planting seedlings, and then also thinning the competing vegetation, and you know, whether you call it thinning or fuels reduction, they kind of achieve the same result, basically opening up the whitebark, kind of improving conditions for its growth. Also in establishing collaborations and partnerships with the parks and the state, and there's several Indian reservations that have some small populations, so we've worked collaboratively with several of them. And then just, you know, I'm sure the funding issue is going to be raised by pretty much everyone, you know, working on developing funding and to pay for all this work. So our program constraints, again, funding, you know, no-brainer there. I think it's probably the same for everyone. You know, just finding the funding to pay for the work. The periodicity of the cone crops in the Pacific Northwest, the cone crops are sporadic, so we're at the mercy of, you know, being able to collect the cones when they're there. And then obviously, you know, kind of seems to be like when it rains, it pours. You know, when it's a good cone crop, it's a good cone crop everywhere. So then, you know, you're trying to find the people to actually do the caging and the collection can be tough. So lack of personnel, that's always an issue. Also, one thing that we find is it's not really perceived to be a high priority. A lot of the work that's done is because of a few key individuals on each forest that are really passionate about whitebark pine, and they're the ones that make sure that whitebark pine is incorporated into the work that they are doing. They incorporate it into their other activities. They make sure that they get out and are doing it. It's just, and there are some, you know, rangers and forest supervisors that do acknowledge, you know, the importance, and they're much more supportive in other areas. The next bullet here, you know, it's not as much bang for the buck. All these whitebark pine, you know, the planting, the thinning, it's all really expensive, and so looking at just how much it costs per acre, it doesn't contribute as much to those forests meeting their targets, like for timber and fuels treatments. So it's difficult to get buy-in sometimes from the higher level managers, because, you know, they need to meet targets, and they could, you know, treat, I don't know, 1 acre of whitebark pine habitat or 10 acres of other habitat, and so, you know, they're looking for the best bang for the buck. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the constraints of how much of the habitat is in wilderness is something that we've run up against. So what's next? We're currently in the process of revising and updating our restoration strategy. If you noticed that the timeline on the original strategy was 2008 to 2013, so we've learned an awful lot about the species, and, you know, we're kind of moved past that original planning horizon, so we're working on updating that, and I think the timing is good because that hopefully will feed into this national effort. Collecting seed, we can, you know, never collect enough seed, so that partly to continue and accelerate our rust resistance screening program, and for just having seed for outplantings. especially the seed from those trees that we've now identified as having some rust resistance. And we've found, in general, across the whole region, and maybe about 10% of the trees have some resistance. It's definitely, some areas it's higher, some areas it's very low. So we're working now on collecting scion from those rust-resistant parents to graft into seed orchards / preservation orchards. As we've gone back to revisit some of these trees that we've identified as being resistant, we found quite a few of them that have been killed by fires, by bark beetles. They've blown over, things like that. So we're basically, creating a genetic archive that also hopefully will produce seeds in the future. And then just increasing the pace and scale of the planting projects and the thinning and fuels reduction treatments. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Whitebark, there's a lot of challenges that we face, and sometimes it's frustrating, with all those challenges. But I found this great quote from Teddy Roosevelt, and it's kind of been in the last several years, my guiding principle. Like, it may be daunting, the challenges we face, but we don't have the funding and the personnel to restore all whitebark pine everywhere. So do what you can with what you have where you are. So, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So for BLM, we have Wade Salverson and Dana Perkins. They're going to share this talk about their latest restoration strategy.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, my name is Wade Salverson. I'm the public domain forestry program lead for the BLM. And so I wanted to first talk about kind of where we are doing some of our efforts right now. Primarily, we're working in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. We do have some whitebark pine on BLM lands outside those states, but those are where most of it is, and that's where most of our work is occurring. So just to kind of give you a little context, PD forestry, or public domain, that's in 12 western states in Alaska, and it excludes the western Oregon ONC lands. So again, most of our whitebark pine is in the public domain. So the size of the program for public domain forestry is $10 million annually, and about $4.3 million go to those 3 states where we're doing most of the whitebark pine work. And that funds about 26 full-time foresters, and then some seasonals on top of that, and then their project work. So just kind of give you some context of kind of the size of our program. Currently, we do have budget directives for those 3 states to fund $150,000 of that $4.3 million directly towards whitebark pine exclusively. And those states can also use the other portions of that allocation per their decisions to fund whitebark pine management. So I just want to run down kind of what they're doing in those 3 different states right now. Starting with Wyoming, they're working on statewide inventory, and they're pretty close to being completely done with that. They started in 2012. And they partnered with the Greater Yellowstone Monitoring Network and the USGS to establish the protocols and the methodologies they're going to use for that. And in 2013 and 2014, they installed 145 long-term monitoring transects. And they're looking for recruitment, blister rust infection rates, and then impacts from mountain pine beetle. They put in some additional long-term transects in 2016, and through those years, they're endeavoring to do a 4-year rotation to revisit those long-term monitoring plots. Wyoming finished the statewide inventory last year in terms of actually visiting the stands aerially in Kemmerer. That was the last field office they worked in. They did the aerial reconnaissance, and so they at least have delineations across the state of Wyoming. They're still working on processing that data, but sometime next year they should have a comprehensive inventory. So Wyoming is pretty far along in that. And then also their program is doing some treatments as well. They're doing treatments both out of the Kemmerer field office and out of the Worland field office. And it's mostly density management, hand treatments, mastication of competing conifers with the whitebark pine. Wyoming is also working on an interagency agreement with the Coeur d'Alene Forest Service Nursery to start growing some seedlings. They're targeting post-fire recovery, as well as augmenting some natural regeneration. So moving on to Montana. So currently, Montana is also working on inventory statewide, and they've completed inventory in the Missoula field office. They have over 3,800 acres identified in the Missoula field office, and it's mostly in mixed stands. They've also verified 11 plus trees for white pine blister rust in Montana, and they're going to be visiting these trees annually to look for a good cone crop, as well as applying verbenone to protect those trees. Montana's pretty far along with seed collection. They have 130,000 seeds in seed bank storage, and also looking for reforestation opportunities. The Dillon Field Office completed 1,792 acres of hand thinning and prescribed fire to promote regeneration and increase stand vigor. And Missoula Field Office has also been doing some thinning, which occurred in 2017. For the Idaho program, they've been also working on the inventory statewide. The Coeur d'Alene Field Office has put in some long-term plots, and so they've got 8 plots in 2 different stands that they're going to be monitoring over the long term for trend analysis. And they've also got identified some possible plus trees they're going to be testing. They're going to be continuing their inventory in 2018. Also, the Chalice Field Office is also ongoing inventory efforts, and they're also doing treatments within some of their identified stands. Both of those offices are going to be doing cone collections in 2018 if all goes well with the crop. As far as barriers in those 3 states, as I said before, access is a challenge. Oftentimes it's quite a long hike in just for half day's work, and also a lot of our whitebark pine occurs in wilderness or wilderness study areas or different land use designations, and a lot of times the kind of management philosophy in those areas is kind of hands-off. And so when we're looking to do mechanical treatments, things like that, there's often some resistance or definitely some education and some persuasion that has to occur before we can start doing treatment in those areas. And then for the rest of the BLM program, there's some really forward-thinking foresters a few years back that wanted to put together kind of a BLM technical reference that we could use that's really driven the treatments and inventory that we're doing right now and the rationale behind them, where we do them and why we do them. And I'm going to hand it over to Dana Perkins, who is one of the lead authors on that, to kind of talk about that.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dana Perkins. I'm retired, I work for the Forest Service and the BLM. And so this strategy we put, let me find this thing together, is what I'm going to talk about. Is piggybacked off the other 3 existing strategies that we already discussed, the Greater Yellowstone areas strategy, the range-wide strategy, and then Pacific Northwest strategy. So we just built upon our strategy and tailored it to BLM and discussed the different kinds of habitats. Our objectives are pretty much the same as what you've heard all morning. Promote genetic diversity, increase white pine blister rust resistance, document the current and potential whitebark pine habitats, find out where we have it, protect known rust-resistant seed sources, and then use a suite of silvicultural practices, thinning and prescribed fire, and wildland fire use to promote and sustain our populations. Like Diana said in her talk this morning, she labeled all the places of her pictures, and I thought that was a good idea. And except for some of these big glossy plates in here that the NOC, the National Operations Center in Denver, decided they needed to put in, all the pictures in here are of whitebark pine on BLM lands. And most of them were taken when I was working on the Chalice Field office. So, like Diana said this morning, we only have 1% of the species range. A lot of our populations border the major core areas on Forest Service. We have mountain islands that are kind of isolated stands in often pretty dry habitats, at least where I have been visiting in the 3 states. Some of them are lower elevation, Doug fir, sagebrush ecotones. And unlike what Wade just said, where I was working, I was able to drive there and they weren't in wilderness. So that was really pretty nice. We did some thinning here. This picture is at the beginning of the 2000 mountain pine beetle outbreak. And this is Poverty Flat on the Chalice Field office. Same threats on BLM lands, the beetles and blister rust is everywhere. So I was assigned, I was detailed into a position to be the coordinator for BLM for 3 states, and I got a lot of help from the Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho foresters in the Washington office and the Forest Health Protection. And the BLM foresters, will you raise your hands so everybody knows where you are if you can? We're a small community, but if you have questions about any of these projects and what we're doing, please go and ask them. We used Marcus Warwell's bioclimatic envelope to map where we thought we had populations, and we ground truth a lot of these, and this is where we started our management. The red areas are on BLM. Is there a little pointer on this thing? Okay, okay. This population, these populations down here are the furthest most south and east of the eastern part of the range in whitebark around BLM. And up here, you can't see it, but in the Sweetgrass Hills east of Glacier Park and about 6 miles from the Canadian border is another mountain island range of limber and whitebark pines. So this, we use the 60% probability of occurrence on BLM because with FIA data and with the U.S. Atlas of Trees from Little's publication, we found that a 90% probability of occurrence was inadequate. It was underestimating the amount we had. Here are the states where we think we have whitebark pine. New Mexico and Utah we don't think, but we have a lot of limber pine. You can see the difference. And this is an ongoing challenge to find out where we have whitebark. Like Wade just said, the Wyoming inventory, the aerial flyovers identify identified another almost 11,000 acres in 2012. When I was, before I retired 2 years ago, these were the locations of forest inventory and plus trees or potential plus trees that we had identified, sites we had visited and gone to. So with the data that we're collecting with our forest inventory, this is just a proportion of species. The green bars are whitebark, and the dark green bars are limber pine. The others are other competing conifers that help us inform our treatments. I went and searched for the link on the BLM website this morning and wasn't successful, but I did hit a number of other sites that have the PDF of this document. We have hard copies available in Boise at the state office, and I've put Joe's contact information. Joe, will you raise your hand again? So Joe has a whole box of copies if anybody wants these. Okay. Well, and I just, in an ongoing collaboration, the BLM is working with the University of Montana, Professor Diana Six, who's the forest entomologist and forest pathologist. And this tree of trees, so I'm working on her with this, is a genetic profile of trees that have survived. It's a cluster analysis of survived the outbreak as compared to the generals, or those are the population, the general population that had not been hit by beetles. And what's pretty neat about this is how they cluster so differently here. And we also found that 9 out of the 19 monoterpenes showed significant differences between the survivors and the general population. So this is pretty interesting for looking at mountain pine beetle resistance. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Melissa Jenkins for the Crown.
Hi there. My name is Melissa Jenkins. I'm the forest silviculturist on the Flathead National Forest, and I'm also the U.S. co-chair of the High Five Working Group. So we are in our infancy. All these other things you've seen, they've had years and years and years to do all this work, and we're just starting out. So we are definitely not as far along, but we are bringing fresh ideas and new enthusiasm and new energy. So I'm excited to talk about it today. So we are a transboundary multi-stakeholder group. We have, go to the, oh, I can do the next slide myself. I am in total control. Okay. This is the Crown of the Continent area. It's in 2 countries, US and Canada. We have areas in both British Columbia and Alberta and the state of Montana. We have multiple tribes and First Nations also. It's 18 million acres. Huge area, and it is incredibly ecologically intact. 60% of the area is in public lands, and we have had no extinctions since Lewis and Clark. I don't think any other place can say that. While we are incredibly ecologically intact, we are incredibly administratively fragmented. I'd like to point out, let's see with the pointer right there, right here in the heart of the ecosystem is the first international peace park. We have peace in our heart. It's the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. We have all sorts of federal lands, provincial lands, state lands. We have NGOs. We have a lot of private landowners. Fish and Wildlife Service, TNC has a lot of lands there in the southern section. We are very administratively complex. Each one has their own mission, their own priorities and policies and regulations. But our diversity makes us stronger. Why do we care about whitebark pine in the CCE? Well, unfortunately, we have the distinction of being the sickest, right? I think you saw that on the blister rust map. We are definitely the sickest. In Canada and Glacier National Park, Cindy Smith found that blister rust infection levels were about 80%. And then in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, Bob Keene went there in '94 when he was a little younger and a little leaner, and went all through the wilderness. And at that time, he thought, blister rust had really devastated the whitebark in '94, right? So in 2014, we did a 20-year reread of a portion of those plots. It's amazing. It's much worse, right? 87% decline in live trees from '94 to 2014, when we already thought we had lost so many. And then in BC, the Moody and Murray brothers there, they found that the CCE area also had the most unhealthy of all regions in BC, with less than 10% of the trees healthy. So we have a lot of reasons to be worried. So the Crown Adaptation Partnership partnered with the U.S. and Canadian chapters of the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, and put together a group in March of 2016 on how we could move forward with addressing restoring whitebark pine and limber pine in this important ecosystem. We don't want that to be the first extinction, right? So out of that meeting came the agreement that we would put together a working group, and we had some things we wanted to work on. So this was our first meeting of the CCE working group back in September, in conjunction with the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation meeting in Whitefish. These are the subcommittees that we have started. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our first year accomplishments. So our first subcommittee was inventory and monitoring. Like everybody else, we need to know where it is and what kind of shape it's in. We were going to use the Willis database, and then we decided that doesn't meet our needs. Thank goodness we come to meetings like this, because now Ellen and some of us were talking from our group, and we're thinking that we can work together to develop inventory and monitoring database that can meet both of our needs. We have also developed predictive distribution modeling for whitebark pine and limber pine in the Crown. And just yesterday, we heard from Steve Brown in Region 1. He's done a lot of work in Region 1 that we think can assist us and supplement this mapping effort that we've already done. So this is the mapping effort that we've already done. You can see that right now, 41% of the CCE could potentially support whitebark, and we did the same thing for limber pine. 20% of the CCE could support limber pine. So the Protected Area Restoration Subcommittee, we've heard lots of talk about wilderness, and it sounds like some of the previous strategies have just said it's in wilderness, so we can't go there. We wanted to move a little bit past that, so we have this subcommittee looking into it. They've identified a framework, a decision framework from the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute. Excuse me, I have that same cold. I was on a plane last week. That identifies triggers and thresholds for action in wilderness, and they are just waiting for us to come up with our strategy, propose what we want to do, and so then they can put it through this decision framework. Fire Management Subcommittee, Bob's in charge, so they got lots done. The goal was to develop recommendations to guide proactive fire management in whitebark and limber pine, so they've done a significant part of it is completed. They didn't do limber pine yet, but Bob says that's no problem. He can fit that in a couple paragraphs. But right now we have guidelines and best practices for managing fire in whitebark pine stands in the Crown of the Continent. We plan to peer review publish this document here soon as we get the national strategy done, or as soon as we all get the national strategy done. But what it does is it provides guidance on what to do before, during, and after wildfires, because as other people have said, wildfires, fire is the way that we are really going to restore whitebark. It is the only thing that can work at the scale that we can really make a huge difference. So there's some examples of what the guidance shows of what to do before, during, and after. I'm not going to read them all, but for example, you do fuel treatment before, suppress fire around plus trees after, during, and plant rust-resistant seedlings after. And it all varies by stand type, and it's a lot more complicated than that. Communications strategy, I haven't really heard a whole lot of talk about that today with the other strategies, but we felt that one of the key barriers was that people didn't know why. They didn't understand how important this species is. So we have a communication strategy subcommittee that is, their mission is to raise awareness and support for whitebark and limber pine restoration. They've developed a framework, and we are currently focusing on trying to get the message out on why it's important in the CCE to restore whitebark and limber pine. This, I don't know if you can see this, but right here is a 5-needle pine. And so this is more of a Canadian focus area, but because they do a lot of commercial and industrial work that affects 5-needle pines. So we felt that we need to develop a mitigation strategy and best management practices to avoid and then also talk about what to do if you did damage this habitat. Focuses on commercial and industrial activity. You know, they spent tens of thousands of dollars saving that one tree, and was that the best use of the funds? Probably not. You know, we could have probably done some offset or something and planted thousands of seedlings for the amount that cost. So the committee has come up with a draft beneficial management practices for whitebark and limber pine document, and it is up for review. And then the last subcommittee is the Restoration Strategy Subcommittee. We're kind of working in tandem with the national strategy. We also did a survey before the national strategy survey. We had done one, identified that, yes, we need to prioritize areas for protection. We need to incorporate clear restoration guidance. And identify mechanisms for sharing resources, same as the other strategies that went before us. And believe me, we are not going to be reinventing the wheel. We're going to be using those other strategies as examples, identified our knowledge gaps. And tomorrow afternoon, we are going to be meeting as a group while the rest of you go on a field trip. We get to stay in here and work on our version of the strategy, the restoration strategy. So thanks to all of the CCE High Five Working Group members. Because we are so diverse, we are stronger, and it's a really exciting group to be a part of. Thank you very much. Oh, visit our website.
Kristen Lake, the Park Service.
Great, thank you. Like everyone that has commented before, this is a great opportunity to get together, and for the Park Service, it gets many of us together that haven't even met each other, and we've talked about doing something where we're looking across whitebark pine, so this is a great opportunity. So, and some of the folks that are, if the folks from the Park Service can raise your hands so I know who you are, that would be great. Awesome. And also that we'll just meet outside for our lunch date. So the folks in red are the ones that are supposed to be here based on our travel regulations. So hopefully seek them out if you have questions. And this is going to be a little bit of repetitive, but there are 11 parks, national parks with whitebark pine in them. And they're kind of distributed into these 3 different mountain ranges, the Rocky Mountains, Cascade, and Southern Sierra Nevadas. This is a conservative estimate of about 130,000 hectares of whitebark pine, again, predominantly in wilderness and divided among the Pacific West and the Intermountain regions. And when you look at like the Rocky Mountains, you obviously have the glacier, which was just kind of explained earlier, and some of the, like the crown of the continent, and then you have the greater Yellowstone, which falls in the presentation that Ellen described. And when you look again across the regions and then the parks, you can kind of see the distribution of whitebark in hectares. And with Olympic having the lowest amount, and then a place like Yellowstone having some of the greater amount. And the range of blister rust infection as well. Again, the Southern Sierra Nevada seem to be the most healthy at this time, although they are starting to pick up presence of blister rust and finding it on their monitoring transects. And again, with Glacier having the highest amounts. The estimates in the greater Yellowstone for those parks is part of the larger inventory and monitoring program that covers Forest Service and Park Service. And then mortality has quite the range as well. And kind of the agents of mortality, and I kind of prioritize these based on what the reports were saying, and other also includes unknown, which was quite a bit in some of the studies, but it was interesting to pick up that there's other bark beetles coming in, and there were also mention of mistletoe showing up in some of the transects. And in fact, in the greater Yellowstone down south in the BLM, they're starting to see some mistletoe as well. And then just kind of a reminder, while we have kind of that doom and gloom, there is regeneration happening in all of these different units, but it's also what's going to happen in the long term with climate change, fire, mountain pine beetle, blister rust. And so it's great to see this going on, but let's cross our fingers and hope for the best along with the restoration work that we do. So in the Park Service with conservation management, we kind of hit on all the parts of it, the monitoring, research, protection, and restoration. And we all fall within managing within our national policies, the 2006 management policies, kind of the laws and regulations such as the Wilderness Act. And then each park needs to decide what their management objectives are going to be for a species or for an ecosystem. And we're very fortunate that each of the park units falls within a long-term monitoring plan. And then if they don't, such as Glacier, they have some monitoring underway with their plus trees, and Crater Lake has additional monitoring. Grand Teton has supplemented the long-term monitoring program. And so each of these areas, in addition to having long-term monitoring transects in place, there are all sorts of research and other activities underway, and it all adds into the information available. And then, as we've been hearing, we're all kind of distributed into these different organizations or groups and have strategies. Some places have strategies already that we're part of, such as in the Greater Yellowstone. We just saw the presentation by Melissa Jenkins for the Crown of the Continent. The Southern Sierra Nevada, they're just starting to get together, a working group, and hoping to capitalize on everybody else's experiences. Crater Lake has a conservation plan in place, and earlier we saw the Pacific West, Northwest area, and hopefully with Olympic and those North Cascades and the other parks that are up there, Mount Rainier can also join in on that. So that's pretty much just the overview. If you go to the different networks or different parks, you can learn more about what's going on with whitebark pine, and then reaching out to that list of folks that I had in the beginning. So pretty short and sweet, and kind of designed that way in case people had questions for the parks too. Quiet.
Thank you, Kristen. For the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribe, we have Tony Cashola Jr. and Rick Everett. Would you mind coming up? Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Cashola, Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes on the Flathead Indian Reservation. We're located just north of Missoula here. Click. Sorry, I didn't get it to you. I was told about this yesterday, so. And then I was told 10 minutes only, and I have to share 5 with Rick. And no slides. I'm trying to sneak it in there. Baby? So I'll make this short and sweet and go over as to what we're doing for our restoration efforts. So this is the state of Montana, in red there, that's the Flathead Indian Reservation. We are in Missoula right there, so just north of us, we're about 1,006,000 acres. Whitebark pine's in our it's on our forest management plan. So in the past 3 years, we kind of strived up the efforts to figure out a plan to restore this, and I'll just short and sweet it. And so the first thing we thought was, well, we need to map it, figure out where we got it. Everything in yellow is kind of our potential habitat. The original mapping, we had about 10,000 acres. We recently mapped in the past 3 years an additional probably 3,000 acres with a higher probability and a few more acres of 1,300. The whitebark that we do have is a common trend with everybody. This is a tribal wilderness area, a buffer zone, and a primitive area, tribal primitive area, where management is restricted and not allowed. So we're finding the same situation. We have a lot of whitebark potential, a lot of whitebark habitat, but it's in restricted or hard to reach places. One area we did find was the Three Lakes area. We did some cone collection there in 2016. We collected data on over 50 trees and collected cones from 15, I think. And 9 of those we sent off to get screened at Coeur d'Alene Nursery. So there's our seedlings at Coeur d'Alene Nursery. Another area we collected from in 2017 is Boulder. It's the northeast portion of the reservation. Highly accessible. The one difference between the two areas was natural disturbance happened in the Three Lakes about 100 years ago, which I'm sure Rick will go more in depth. And Boulder area is an active management area right now for timber sales and regeneration harvest. So we're going to kind of see the trends between the two in the future, hopefully. Again, we collected data from both sites. 12 trees were climbed. We're borrowing the BLM boys from the Missoula office to do our climbing since we don't have certified climbers yet. That's been kind of a limitation to us. We want to certify our own climbers. Not that I don't like using the BLM guys. Other areas we're scouting, Moss Peak, located a little more south on the Mission Mountain Range. CPay, which is right against the 9 Mile Ranger District, and they have plush trees located right to our border, so it's a high probability we're going to find some good trees in that area. Another site which you guys are supposed to go on a field trip, well, that's Valley Creek area. We're finding a lot of plush tree candidates along these screes on the very top of those mountains there. And then I think you guys are planning on going on a field trip up the Snowbolt area tomorrow. They do got a lot of plush trees neighboring us right there. This is the tribal primitive area, and we plan on getting in there next year. We're doing good enough. I think we're training even our fire guys. It's a helicopter crew. When they IA'd a fire, they said, "Hey, we seen whitebark." So they start taking measurements for me. So hopefully the word's getting out. Grow whitebark. We have a large nursery facility on the reservation run by the tribe. So our goal is to collect and build that seed bank. We clean our own seed at our nursery. We have a large cooler for storing, and we're starting to sow. So this is in Coeur d'Alene Nursery, and that's what I hope my nursery looks like pretty soon. But I stole that from Coeur d'Alene. We did try to test grow about 200 seedlings this year. We did acid treatment, didn't get a high germination rate. We went to Coeur d'Alene a couple weeks ago, found a few tricks of the trade from them, and I think next year we're going to have higher success. This is one of our facilities. As you can see, we have a fairly large facility. You can grow about a million trees at once. What we're trying to shoot for is a outside high elevation orchard. And that way we can collect on site in high elevation, basically mimic what they're doing over in the plains. So, and then future, we're going to develop some RX burning projects and restore some mechanical retreat areas. So, Rick, try not to steal too much. Do you need a map?
Yeah, that'd be funny.
That'll work. My name's Rick Everett. I'm the program director of the Wildland Fire Program at Salish Kootenai College. And one of the nicer things I get to do is go ahead and try to do research out in the forest of the tribal lands. And the tribe has graciously allowed me to go ahead and do that. One of the things that I am working on in conjunction with some fire lab personnel and some personnel at MSU and with USGS is trying to take a look at the fire regimes of 3 different fire regime types of the whitebark pine up there in the tribal lands. And we've been at nice cooperative purposes where I've been able to identify a couple of places that Tony can take his people to. He's been able to identify some places that I can go take a look at. What it's boiled down to with our project and where we're going to wind up going with it is last year we were able to go ahead and place approximately 2 kilometers square sampling areas where we're sampling on a grid. If you're familiar with fire scar dendrochronology, it's one of the things we wind up doing to get a spatial reconstruction on these areas. Three Lakes Peak is one of the sites that we did a 2 kilometer square area. We have an almost 2 kilometer square area by Boulder. We're just now processing the results on those kinds of things where we are seeing disturbance in the Three Lakes area for probably from the 1889 and 1910 events. We get almost the same record up at Boulder. Fortunately for me, our funding agencies, which are usually USDA, NEFA, have been very, very kind in awarding us continuing grants for these kinds of things. And with tribal permission, what we'd like to do now is go ahead and expand our fire regime reconstruction to some of the more open stands, the south-facing stands of whitebark pine, and get a better idea of how often fire's going through those sites. As usual, being a fire scar kind of person, I always want more fire scars, but we do have age and stand demographics from these areas now. Each one of these areas, we've cored approximately 1,200 trees. Around between 15 and 30% are whitebark, depending on the plot. And we're coming up with a fairly big suite of demographic data that we can give back to the tribe and give back to working groups and try to establish a better idea of what the role of fire has been up here in the northern Intermountain area for whitebark pine.
Thanks, Tony and Rick. All right, so the last session of the day for this current regional restoration plan section is Mary Frances Mihalovich, talk about genetic restoration program for the Intermountain West. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric. So we're going to get down into a little bit more detail about the efforts of our genetic restoration program over the last 20 years. And it encompasses Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Nevada, so approximately 6.8 million acres of whitebark pine throughout the inland west. I just wanted to give you a little structure for how I'm going to present the results to you. We're basically interested in that genetic variation that we can pass on to the next generation. So I've grouped the presentation to within 3 of those 4 elements, talking about the testing program, the seed orchards, and gene conservation. The foundation of the entire program is based on the 1,300 plus trees that all of our cooperators and collaborators have designated across those 4 state regions. One of the major challenges over the last 20 years is that we've lost approximately 23% of those plus trees, predominantly due to mountain pine beetle in the recent outbreak and wildland fire. But they're the foundation and basis success for this program. I was initially charged with identifying and harnessing blister rust resistance, but one of the threats that was identified this morning facing whitebark pine is climate change. So in 2006, we began to assess cold hardiness as well as rust resistance. And then in 2011, we employed stable isotope analysis to characterize drought avoidance or more generically drought tolerance. We also wanted to know if we're structuring a restoration program, we needed to do some molecular work with the national lab. Valerie Hipkins is here to get an idea what kinds of levels of diversity did we have in whitebark, and did we have inbreeding depression because of the threats that are facing whitebark, those stochastic events that may reduce the gene flow. So we have a rich history of several different types of tests that we've used in the genetic restoration program. And then when we're done with the rust screenings, we've had a total of 7 rust screenings. 3 are at Coeur d'Alene right now. We take the survivors and put them out in the field to continue to monitor their performance and levels of diversity. Once we start to have appreciable cone crops in our 4 seed orchards that represent the 4 major ecosystems in the inland west, then we'll take those seed lots and put them out under operational conditions to see does the rust resistance and cold hardiness and drought tolerance hold up under different silvicultural prescriptions. But that's several years down the road. So one of the things that, because the major emphasis was on developing rust resistance, we now have data for 5 of the ecosystems. I'll be working on Nevada State over the winter. We just got those final data in September from Coeur d'Alene. But we do have rust resistance in whitebark pine. It varies spatially and temporally, and it varies by spore load. So we, by design, wanted to be able to give folks that were developing prescriptions some idea was what was the best case scenario for rust resistance under normal spore loads and under wave year events. And we really do nuke those trees at Coeur d'Alene, putting on about 20,000 spores per square centimeter. We want to know in a wave year event, when you have local amplification of the blister rust cycle, can those trees that we classify as rust resistant really hold up over time? So we're beginning to take all of these data from the genetics program and get those spatially represented for other land management planning, forest planning, adaptation, vulnerability assessments, as well as species distribution models to figure out presence and absence of where whitebark will occur in the future. Some of the challenges that I've faced over the years, people feel that material that are coming out of all of our genetics programs, not just the Inland West, will be completely rust-free. And so I have to dial folks back and say we're developing resistance. So be prepared to still see spotting and branch flagging and cankers, because 7 of the traits that we screen for, you actually have to infect the tree in order for that resistance mechanism to express itself. So we're not going to be releasing completely rust-free trees from any of our genetics programs. And because we're practicing selection, some people have misinterpreted that and think that we're developing genetically modified organisms. So that's another education and outreach that we've had to address over the last 20 years, that we're selecting the best phenotypes and then we're allowing them to naturally interbreed, but we're not inserting foreign DNA in our genetics program. Another concern that we had and a challenge with the wildlife community, in particular the grizzly bear research and management community, is that by selecting for rust resistance, we were going to make a less nutritious pine nut for grizzly bears. So we characterized the pine nut nutritional ecology for all of these ecosystems. And in fact, our resistant seed has higher energy, 7,300 calories per gram. the same levels of crude fat as susceptible seedlots, and slightly more protein. And so for those of you that eat pine nuts, I learned the hard way, shelling seed for stable isotopes that goes straight to the hips, and it's kind of hard to get it out. So we're not negatively impacting the pine nut crop for those species that have been identified that are dependent in the fall and spring. Another component of that recurrent selection program and that we share with Forest Health Protection is gene conservation. And we have several elements of conservation in the genetics program from those live leaf tree network. So we're down to about 1,100 plus trees because we've lost some to mountain pine beetle and fire. And I'm a little worried to find out over the next field season how many more we've lost to the field season fire in 2017. We know we can't protect all of these individuals across the landscape. And so we've established 4 clone banks for each of the ecosystems. We have approximately 1,800 pounds of seed. And one of the reasons I asked for the amount of seed, not only for genetic testing, but the program now has the opportunity to provide seed after this intense fire season to replace seed sources on the landscape. So we have the ability, approximately a 10-year seed supply in the genetics program, that we can establish land races and restore not only the resistance, but the genetic diversity after this huge fire season. We're also collecting pollen. It's our sperm bank, just like the zoos. But we're also going to use that material for pollinating our orchards. As well as developing full SIB crosses that we're going to release on the landscape. We just began our crossing this year at Coeur d'Alene so that we can monitor for changes in virulence in the rust on the landscape. So as I've mentioned, I've taken all of the genetics data over the last 20 years and spatially represented it with hybrid regression models or kriging. And so we know about rust resistance, drought tolerance, cold hardiness, and genetic diversity from our molecular study. And just this past year, with 2 others, co-authors, Steve Winward and Mark Kimsey, we integrated these in a manner, applied some filters for suitable substrate, and we looked at various mid-century climate change scenarios with key variables important to describing variation in whitebark. And so I would like to propose for this week during the summit that the 24% of the interior species distribution where we have identified genetic refugia, that you consider those as part of your core areas and priority areas during the summit and in the subsequent strategy development. We have 4 seed orchards in each of the major ecosystems, and as Andy said, it's very difficult to overcome that cone crop periodicity, and chasing cone crops across the landscape is very expensive. It's about $4,500 for every seed lot. 1 seed costs us about 71 cents to collect, and so if we can put all of that rust-resistant, cold-hardy, and drought-tolerant material in one location, and culture it for early and abundant flowering, then we can have a more reliable seed source that we don't have to wait for those masting events. We located them back in whitebark pine habitat so that we could ensure reproductive flowering. There was some concern that if we brought them down at lower elevations, that they may just exhibit vegetative growth and never put on cones or pollen catkins. So one thing that's really key and was a challenge or barrier for a short period of time, but we finally overcame it, was to get people to come together in regional groups and develop what their seed needs were for whitebark pine. And one of the things that we use those seed procurement plans for is to figure out how many acres do we need for each of those ecosystems. So we're at about 60% establishment, and I would hope over the next 2 to 3 years that we can get those 4 seed orchards finalized. And then the hard task with the seed orchard managers, Clay is here today, of culturing those, keeping them alive, and then when they get big enough caliper, then he can start applying gibberellic acid to produce, encourage flowering. Now, we do have rust resistance that we can deploy for our planting programs until those seed orchards come online. So the short-term guidance is we can use the blister rust resistance rankings from those 4 rust trials at Coeur d'Alene Nursery. If I have a challenge with our collaborators and partners is once I provide these rankings and I use the 4-H, blue ribbon, red ribbon, and white to rank them first place, second place, and third. The problems arise when somebody's favorite area isn't in the upper 25th percentile. But I've had some folks that have still gone and collected from their areas. There's also been a challenge or a concern that if we just focus in each of those ecosystems, the upper 25th percentile, that we might be reducing genetic diversity. And I can tell you from an analysis last week that we haven't even begun to collect seed lots for operational planting and direct seeding from all of those areas. So we're not even near reducing genetic diversity by just focusing on the upper 25th percentile. But we have these worksheets for each of the major ecosystems. So here's the payoff. We've planted about 1% of the inland west species distribution. But you can see as the interest in whitebark has increased over time, so have the number of acres that have been planted in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. So I would like to thank all of our collaborators that have plowed through and worked out the prescriptions, the seed extraction and seedling protocols at Coeur d'Alene have all helped in achieving these successes over the last few years. And these are some of our partners that have contributed either funding to the studies or plant materials with seed, scion, and pollen. So thank everybody for your effort that we can build on and supply this genetic information to developing the summit and the strategy. Thanks.
Thank you. Great job. We're going to start off this morning with a video that Mike Durglow showed. We started to last night, but had technical difficulties. We got a new media player, and so we're going to show it this morning now. As he mentioned, this is an interview with elders from their tribe about climate change and their experiences with it.
Even today, you can tell the difference, the seasons. The seasons are not like they used to be. And even the birds, you start noticing that new kind of different birds are coming into this area.
But when we came down here, there was so much more snow than there. Like going down to Arley, Dad used to show us the glaciers, the formations of the thing that, they used to have different shapes, and I can't remember the names of them they used to call them. But there was a lot of snow up there that stayed. 4th of July is when we came down, and you could see it up there. Yeah. And he used to come down to fish, and had good fish then before they start messing with the lake, with the...
Like in November, there you'd see a couple of fires. You're kind of in the evening and stuff like that, a fire going up there, and you know what they were doing. They were fishing for salmon. And up on Dayton Creek. We used to be able to snag them out of there. And all of a sudden they're gone. We don't know where they are.
We don't worry just for us human beings, but for the animals too, you know. We're kind of connected to the animals as Indian people.
Well, weather change is coming and it's going to get hotter, I think. And what do we do about it? And how does it affect the animals that live around in this area, like the deer, the elk? I think the deer kind of like it because they feed all year round now without. Usually when there's lots of snow, they have to eat the moss off the trees, but they don't have to do that anymore. But then probably the moss is going to be gone now too. You got to do something with the weather. Everything got to do with the weather. And when you got the weather change, you ain't going to have that much water up there in them hills. Where the animals used to water and stuff like that year round, you know. Springs are probably going dry up there.
This is what I always remember when I was growing up. The cold weather and the lot of snow, which was good. Because the old people always said, like Shirley said, they knew you had to have cold weather. Maybe they didn't know what a germ was, but still, they said you had to have some cold, few days of cold weather to get rid of the sickness and to get rid of so many things that comes around, you know. So just like it purifies things and you start anew whenever. After the cold weather, about this time of the year, usually in March.
The huckleberries, they are just disappearing so fast that I guess all the areas we used to go to, see, I've been away from there for 53 years, but the areas we used to go to was Sand Creek, and that was up in Jaffrey area, and that was a popular area, and then in Elko, up the, what did they call it? I'm gonna be, I won't remember some of the names because memory's gone. There was a good place there, and they're all gone. They're just, I don't know if we need a good fire, you know, and I think that's what it's, part of it. On the berries, the plants, I don't know why. The climate change has probably contributed to the demise of a lot of the plants that we used to have.
Then I talked to some people there and said, well, some of those plants, you know, the way it global warming keeps going, you know, we might have to have greenhouses where we can have to plant our plants for medicine, you know. If you want medicine, you have to go to a greenhouse and get it, you know, because they ain't gonna be up in the mountains anymore. It'll be all.
I think the bitterroot are in trouble. You know, they picked in about 1 or 2 weeks out of the year and stuff, and you lose one dry season or something like this. I don't know if you'll have any up there.
You know, and today we don't have no more snow, you know. Why? Why is it, you know? How come we got so many fires? Is it too dry? What is it, you know? Not enough rain? Why is there bugs around? You know, there's beetles. Because it's too dry, it's not cold enough to kill them all. There's that question, you know.
The elders would sit down and they'd tell stories. And some of the things that I heard, they would talk about a certain thing that's coming. And they said it in the Indian, they said, Puti Tines, it's still coming. And you'll see it in your time. And I've seen a lot of these things that they talked about back there. And I witnessed it. And one of the things that I want to bring out today that's happening now, they said one day this earth is going to become warm. And said maybe it happened in your time. It said snow and ice is going to melt in the North Pole. The oceans are going to fill up. Islands are going to flood. And the earth here is going to be warm. Summertime will be extremely hot. Wintertime, you won't get no real cold weather. Maybe short cold weather, but most of the time will be warm. I'm witnessing that today, and I'm glad I can talk about it, because I've actually seen it happen. And I never believed it back in those days, that now everything is going to be the same all the time. But I've seen that change. The other thing they talk about was the face of this earth may burn up, but it's not going to destroy you. Your timber will be gone, there'll be no more timber, but you're going to survive because you are who you are. You're Indian, you understand the earth, you're one with the earth, you understand that, and you're going to survive. And today, I'm witnessing forest fires, burning thousands of acres of forest.
I remember my uncle Pete Beaverhead, and I used to hear him talking, and they say, well, it's going to be changing, just like our language, our life, the snowpack, and it seemed like they knew, I don't know how they knew, but I guess they were wise. Maybe they learned it from their folks, kind of handed down generation to generation. And to me, I start to realize it is changing. The life is changing, the world's changing. Everything's changing, and just like you're talking about fish, animals. And I remember years ago, the snow was deep, it was cold. Even when I stayed with Derglos, Conrad Derglo and them, we used to go cut wood. I'd hear that wood pop from the sap, it was that cold,
So at that time, you can tell that when it gets in the wintertime, it's cold and the snow is deep. Sometimes you only see the top when you go down there. When you go down a county road, you only can see a little, maybe an inch of the fence post sticking out.
Right here in the Elmo area, when I was young, going to grade school here, in the wintertime we used to ice skate from November to at least February every year. A lot of ice out there. And nowadays you don't have it.
Dad would, mention the different things, and one of the things he always did was everybody that took a drink out of that creek or the other one that come out of the hill, you always put some back. So you took a drink and then you threw some on the plants or somewhere. That was his belief,
And my elders used to say, that's what we're supposed to do, Hand it down, hand it down, hand it down. And we forget about those things, hand it down.